Okay, so now we have learned the basics of speed tree. Let us use this knowledge to build a pine tree. So speed tree does have a pine tree preset that we could start off with. But again, for learning purposes, let's just build this thing from scratch. So the first thing we would need to do is gather some references. So if I open up something that I have here, it's important to try and understand the tree that you are trying to create and find out its characteristics, like how tall it is and what type of shape do the branches take, what does the bark look like, etc, etc. Because each tree is very distinctive, and if what we are trying to do is build a realistic environment, then we have to respect the flora within that environment. Now for this video, we are going to try and create a tree that would hold up well at mid-distance. It will be rather complex, as pine trees are very complex, and it will also be quite heavy. However, once we have created this tree, we will reduce this so we can make it more usable even at mid-distance, and then optimize it further so we can use it within our scatters, as we need to make sure that our scatters remain efficient. So let's begin, and we will start with the trunk. So right click and add a trunk. Now Douglas firs can grow up to around 300 feet at their highest, but on average they are between 100 and 120 or 30 feet. So we'll add that in by going to the spine tab and changing this to 100. Of course, I will be going a little bit quicker here than the previous videos, only because now we have covered all the basics. I don't need to go ahead and explain every single thing that I am doing. But please follow along. So the width here doesn't actually look too bad, but we'll thicken it up a little and alter the graph to thicken it at the top. So let me go to the skin tab and open up this graph here and just thicken this up at the top. That's a bit better. And I might change this actually just to 1.1. This feels a bit better. I also want to reduce the noise a little here, as we have a little too much wobble running up and down the tree. So let me go to the noise section in the spine tab and just take this right down. Don't remove it completely, but take it right down. Okay, so next let's put down a branch node that is set to proportional steps. So right click, add geometry, big branches, and again drag and drop on top. Now I'll set the steps to something like 20. If I change this to proportional steps, set this to 20, and I'll change the number to around 6, which adds some more branches around the radius of the tree, and I'll add a little offset just to get some variation in here. Now we have a lot, don't worry, we'll control this a little later. So scrolling down, I don't want to extend the parent for now, as pine trees have a very distinctive tip. Let me just grab some reference. They have a very distinctive tip, so we want to make this and be quite specific with what this looks like. So for the moment, I won't extend any, but I will change the first and the last. So I'll take this down so the branches start a bit lower. And in the spine tab, let's just reduce this radius just to something like 0.3. And I'll also reduce the randomization to something like 0.02. I also want to make sure that these branches are getting smaller towards the top. So let me just delete these nodes and reduce the scale the higher we go. Something like this. And I'll bring this base one back into. If I double click, that resets the graph. So looking back at the reference, the branches come out and they begin to droop in the middle and then poke back up at the end. You can see that right along. So let's try and achieve this same shape within our branches. We will adjust the start angle to something like, let's see, 0.7. But adjust the graph to make sure that these branches angle at the top, as again, that's what we see in the reference. Here, they start to angle back up. So jump into the graph and do something like this. Awesome. So the last thing I want to do here is just to make sure that the branches angle back up. So I can do this using the gravity. And I'll just reduce this a bit. Something small, like 0.03. And that just adds the curve back up the tree. I will have a quick look at the noise to make sure that it's not too strong. It's quite strong at the moment. Just to straighten these out a little more. There, that's better. So one of the things that we get with Douglas fir and pine trees in general is a lot of breaks at the base of the tree. So let's add some of these in by increasing the break chance to 1 and reducing the spot so these breaks start a little earlier. You can see they are already randomized here, so we'll leave this as is. And finally, just reduce these at the top of the tree and make sure that they are only coming into effect at the bottom. So I'll just take this all the way down. And control this by adding a point in here. Awesome. Let me just take this spot down a little more, something like 0.1 maybe. Okay. So looking at these branches, they are still a little thick actually. So I'll go to the skin again, take this down to something like 0.4. That feels a bit better. Moving back to the spine tab, I think I will lift this up just a little more so they come out a bit straighter or a bit lower at the bottom. This way we get this nice progression from pointing downwards to pointing upwards at the top. And I will also change the last here to something like 1, just to get them right at the top. Cool. Okay, so this is okay for now. Let's take a look at some of the branch references. I'll just bring them up here. Now, the main problem that we run into with fir trees is the sheer amount of needles that they need to fill in this shape and give it its form. We could use cards here, but surprisingly, they are actually more difficult to render than geometry, as calculating that many opacity maps on top of one another is actually very expensive. The hit we take here though is building the geometry, as we are creating each one of these needles using geometry itself. But as the tree is instanced and Houdini is very good at handling geometry, we don't have to worry too much about this as long as we keep the overall poly count low enough to make sure that this doesn't become a problem. So going back to the branches, let's duplicate these, copy and paste, and drag them back on top. And you can see that this isn't quite what we need. They don't look like the Douglas fir yet, so let's fix this. The branches, if we look at the reference, come out fairly straight and then go down pretty quickly. So we can control this using both the alignment angle, the start angle, and the gravity. First, let's change the mode back to interval and up the frequency to about 4, and get these branches to start a little earlier by setting this to 0.05. I also don't want these new branches on the broken base, so let's just set the knockout to 1 and adjust the graph to remove these. If I look at the bottom of the tree, you'll see that we have some rogue twigs sticking out of these broken branches. So let's just knock some of these back out. Go down to knockout and set this to 1. I will go into the graph here, and on the trunk add a point. Take this all the way down. So by putting this down, we are reducing the knockout. So we're reducing the knockout the further it goes up the tree. So you can see we get some less branches down here. Okay. I'll get close to one of these branches so we can see what is going on here. So on the length, I want to control this a little better. So I will reduce this to 0 and the randomness to 0 and set the absolute length to something like 6. And this is just to make sure we can control the length of these twigs and make sure they're more consistent over the height of the tree. And jumping back to the reference again, we want these branches to be shorter at the base and shorter again at the tip, and then become a bit longer in the middle. We will adjust the graph to reflect this. If I open it up and add another point here, right click, insert point, I'll drag it down at the base. You can see we are going along the big branches. Drag it down at the tip and open up this bezier along the middle. Now, of course, they aren't facing in the right direction yet, so we will change the start angle to reflect this, change to something like 0.15. So the branches follow more the direction of the previous branch, and I'll increase the gravity to something like 0.2. Let me just type this in. And to fix the shape, I will just adjust the graph so it's not so strong at the end. Lift this up, take this down. Nice. So also remember to remove the break chance here. We don't want any branches being broken. Cool, so this is a good start. Let's carry on. Now I just want to add one more layer of branches before we add the twigs. So just copy and paste this previous version. And zoom in a little to see what is happening here. I want to set these branches to go to the Gen tab, increase the frequency to make sure we have some more. The count at 4 is fine. And I'll increase the spread to 1 to space them out. Now they are obviously far too long. So if we go to the spine tab, we can reduce the length. to 1. And this time I do want them to be affected by the length of the previous branch, or the branch that they are generated upon. So let me set this to 0.2. And finally, let's adjust the start angle and the gravity as they come out a little straighter than this. So set this to something like 0.3. And I'll also adjust this graph so they don't dip too much at the end. And reduce the gravity. Okay, so this works a bit better, and this will do for the last branches node that we need. So next, let's throw in some twigs.